Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Bill. I'm not testing positive for COVID, but I unfortunately do have a bit of a cold, so if I have to do a little bit of a interlude for the hanky, please accept my apologies. As Peter said, Alan Ross, Director of Engineering and Asset Management. It will be 40 years that my career has spanned this time next year, so if that doesn't make me feel old, then I'm not sure what does. But to be honest, I'm still as excited, probably even more excited now, having spent almost 40 years in the rail industry, because of the opportunities that the rail industry has. And the rail industry and the opportunities in the rail industry for engineers are probably greater now than they have been for many a year, many a decade. And I think it's incumbent on us all as engineers and operators, but as railway individuals who can really make a difference, to make that difference, to rise to the challenge. So, unfortunately, Bill and I, because we're joined at the hip quite a bit, do tend to overlap. So I will try not overlap as much as I can. So Bill's already talked about why electrify. And indeed the reason is we must electrify, but we recognise that there will be stages of that electrification as part of our wider decarbonisation of rail. And that's fundamental for two things. Again, we've got to reduce the net cost of the railway. Scotland cannot afford Scotland's railway. That's quite clear. The impact of the pandemic has made that really stark. So driving down the net cost of the railway is of paramount importance. And the emphasis on net cost, it's not just the cost of Network Rail, what we invest in terms of a renewal programme, it's about the cost of owning, operating the rolling stock, and how we actually encourage revenue growth, be that through the freight sector or be that through the passenger sector, and it's getting that mix. So if there's two key things to take away from today, it's net zero and net cost. The two must come together, and without one, we're unlikely to achieve the other. Because affordability will drive the ambition will unlock the benefits, and the benefits will drive down the cost. And as Bill's already said, freight will become an ever more important role in that decarbonisation journey for Scotland. I think for every freight train that we put on the network, that takes the equivalent of 40 tonne HGVs off the road. So not only is that reducing the net carbon in Scotland, it's also reducing the net cost of transport in Scotland, because the cost of maintaining the roads doesn't come free either. So again, the whole integrated transport mix, as Bill has already said, that the Scottish Government has set out, is critical. And everything that we do in the rail industry goes back to that key objectives. So Bill's already painted the picture. You know, Scotland has been decarbonising our railway, call it electrification, since the 1960s. We didn't do too much in the 80s, and we gradually picked up again in the noughties, and more recently. We decarbonised, electrified quite a bit of the Central Belt. So we have got some experience here in Scotland. But as I'll come on to later, moving to a programme is far more effective and is the only way to do this rather than treating it as individual projects. So the railway, as most people know, is a system of systems. You can't change one part without changing another. So getting that timing right and getting that understanding of how we change the railway between the passenger and the freight timetables, because the two of them are intrinsically linked. The need to get more freight on the network requires us to have a freight service that can keep up, to put it in real simple terms, with the passenger service. But it also needs to be one that's increasingly decarbonised. So getting that blend and getting that mix and seeking out those opportunities of when we're replacing rolling stock, when we are replacing a number of our assets through our domestic renewal programmes, and linking and integrating all of them to make sure that we hit that sweet spot between investing and investing at the right time to deliver the maximum outputs, but also to minimise the disruption that we cause. Because one of our challenges is to invest in rail is generally quite a costly affair, both in terms of the capital, but it's also quite costly in terms of the disruption. And at a time when we're trying to attract individuals and freight users onto the railway, at the same time as we're trying to go through a transformational decarbonisation programme, we've got to keep that rail service operating. It's got to be punctual, it's got to be reliable, and it's got to be open at the times that those individuals and freight operators want to use it. So again, we're already seeing, and I think we'll continue to see this significant shift from the traditional outage windows, the Easters, the Christmases, the bank holidays, the weekends. So as engineers, we need to play our part in understanding how we can change decades worth of approach into meeting the demands, because we are a demand-led industry. And to a certain extent, we've probably forgot that over the midst of time. You know, we've become hostage to fortune. We follow standards rather than being led by where engineers used to be, which was at the growth pinnacle. You know, so where does the growth need to be made, and how do we as engineers unlock it? Excuse me. Bill's talked about our rail decarbonisation programme. So the Scottish Government have been pretty clear with their ambitious yet challenging programme. And as Bill's already said, the only real sensible way to meet that growth, particularly for freight, is to electrify. But there will be a blend. There'll be a blend of initially battery EMUs, because that gives you the benefit of decarbonisation. And it begins to unlock the opportunities to then join up that strategic freight corridor. And that's an approach I think we have got right here in Scotland. We haven't got to the end of that journey yet. In fact, we're probably only at the start of it. But working with colleagues in Transport Scotland and colleagues in ScotRail, or ScotRail Trains now, but also the wider industry, and really importantly our supply chain partners, that's how we can maximise that integrated approach, recognising that it is incremental, but incremental benefit is key, because we can't wait for the grand unveil. You know, if there's one thing that politicians need, that's incremental benefits. That's what keeps them in posts. And we need to raise that challenge. So it is about driving that cost down, seeking out those opportunities, reducing the footprint by which it takes us to deliver it, but at the same time working across the industry. So get that core cost down, get that key benefits out, and what that will do, it will continue to attract and encourage and promote rail as that real critical transport network that can meet those ambitious targets of decarbonisation, but more importantly, get the modal transfer from freight in particular to rail, because that's the key prize. As Bill's already mentioned, to a certain extent, you know, rail is already a carbon-efficient mode of transport. I think 1.6% or thereabouts. So why would you invest? Well, the investment decisions are based on modal shift. And modal shift relies upon net costs getting down to where it needs to be. You know, so we're in that virtuous circle, as I like to look at it, rather than the vicious circle. So we must keep on that virtuous circle. So let's getting back to electrification, because at the end of the day, that's why the majority of us are here today. So electrification, as we all know, is a challenge. It's something that the UK has probably stumbled across, and probably that's because of our sort of stop-start nature. Other parts of Europe have continued with that rolling programme approach, and that's what we are definitely trying to achieve here in Scotland. It is that approach to a rolling programme that drives the cost down, gives certainty into the supply chain, unlocks the opportunities that we know, because our supply chain are telling us. If we've got that longevity, we can invest in people, we can invest in technology, we can invest in plant. And all of these things require that level of, I guess, trust, but also commitment. Because those investments in time and in money, they need to make returns on them. So getting that rolling programme is really essential. So there are some challenges here in Scotland. So our network is quite tightly constrained by gauge, not unusually, but there are some particular challenges on the Highland Main Line, for example. You know, some of our tunnels and some of our viaducts are going to make it really, really challenging for us as engineers to come up with novel, innovative, low-cost solutions to allow that continuous electrification. And the Highland Main Line is a particular challenge for us. But there are other challenges. The iconic Forth Bridge is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Stringing up unsightly overhead line wires in that environment is an imperative, so we need to think about how we can do it sympathetically. So again, an awful lot of work's going on as to how we can do that, Initially, it will form part of our discontinued programme, but ultimately, to unlock those freight potentials, we need to get the wires across the bridge. It is doable, but again, it's working that balance between making it cost-effective and fitting in with that iconic World Heritage status, which has some very stringent guidelines as the man responsible for making sure we don't lose that. So I've got a double-edged sword here. We need to get the wires across, but we can't lose that World Heritage status. And probably one of the largest challenges that we have, that not within Network Rail, or indeed the rail industry's immediate gift, is how do we actually provide power to this network? A lot of our network is out with the central belt, and for those of you who know Scotland, if you were to take a satellite image of Scotland at night, on a clear night, we do get them, you will see that there's not very much illumination from out with the central belt. What that generally means is there's not a lot of people staying in the vast rural parts of the network, but if there's not a lot of electricity there today, then how do we get the level of supply at the time that we need it to the network? And that's a big challenge. It's a challenge for us. It's a challenge for National Grid and the two main distribution network operators here in Scotland. But we are working very collaboratively with them. So we've drawn that out as a specific programme activity so that we can get ahead of the curve, share our timescales, understand where the utilities are providing their changes to their network, and how we can work together with them, A, to take out costs, but to make sure we get the programmes aligned. So we're not squabbling over, who hasn't provided what when we need it. And again, there's some novel aspects that we've been looked at, some of the things that we have done over the past that we've now changed, some of the approaches that they've taken. All of it has led to bigger buildings, more cost, and one of the biggest costs is the footprint. A lot of the land that we have in Scotland, we don't own. A lot of the land that we need, people will see opportunities to make money. So again, if we can reduce the footprint of what we need to put in the ground, then that takes some costs out. And every little helps. As I said, we have been delivering electrification here in Scotland for probably the last 15 years. And we've made a pretty good job at it. We've had our moments, so let's not kid ourselves, we've had our moments. But in general, we've been delivering electrification in Scotland within the cost envelope and within the time frame that we committed to. But we are still reassuringly too expensive. Bill and colleagues within Transport Scotland continually challenge us, we continually challenge ourselves, and we know that we can do better. And we've proven that. So we're learning the lessons from the projects that we have delivered in the past. We're part of a number of forums, the Efficient Electrification Programme, Peter, I know you sit on that, where we're taking ideas from others, but more importantly, we're making sure that the ideas, the innovation, the approach that we're applying here in Scotland is transparent so that the wider rail industry and GB can adopt it and can apply it. Because a number of our suppliers are national suppliers, so to a certain extent we want to make sure we're sharing that best practice, but also taking it on board where, if someone else is doing something that we aren't. And generally we find that that's maybe not the case, but there are examples. Over the years, we've tended to focus in on projects. It's been project by project by project. And we know that that's delivered, but we also know that it's inefficient. It's inefficient because it's stop-start in nature. It's inefficient because we raise the skills of the suppliers, we raise the skills of our engineers, and then we stop, and people go elsewhere. In some cases, they change sectors, and we lose them forever. It's difficult to grow and retain talent. So for all the things I talked about earlier about the need to commit to a programme, understanding the true benefits of a programme-led, a rolling programme of electrification has been key. And that's something that we've been working hard on with our suppliers. Because at the end of the day, the suppliers are very, very key to this. They understand and they have got ideas about how they can do things safer, quicker, and generally for a lower cost. And some of it's just about integrating across our supply chain. So again, here in Scotland, we're working with our main framework suppliers across the railway system. So it's not just about those individuals who need to do the route clearance, DVEG, a lot of the civil stuff. It's not just about the individuals who need to put the wires up. It's not just about the signalling and telecoms guys who need to come along immunise. And again, it's not just about the designers. So it is about understanding the programme of activities, understanding the opportunities where the programme aligns, but also making it very clear where that programme is actually going to bring us into conflict. Because it's generally those conflicts that cost us time, money, and disappointment. So again, by looking at this as a programme across Scotland, an integrated programme across Scotland that looks at the need to decarbonise, let's all call it electrification in this room, but also the fact that, you know, through Scottish Government, we generally spend about £2 billion a year on replacing, renewing, refurbishing our assets. So it's really critical, particularly when we know that funds will be ever tighter to get hold of, is that we really maximise the benefits of integrating the core renewals with the opportunities to decarbonise. That takes costs out of the system, it lessens disruption, and it aids our journey to attract and retain customers, be they freight or be they passenger. So one of the key things that we've been discussing with our supply chain is, so what does a rolling programme of electrification look like? You know, is it 200 STKs a year? Is it 50? Is it 150? So again, it's a bit of horses for courses. So by understanding all of the factors that come into play, by understanding the level of investment, not just in decarbonisation, but across Scotland's railway, and also with an eye of the investment that's going on out with of Scotland, we can then start to understand what really represents that sweet spot between volume, funds that are available, and disruption that we potentially will make or can avoid to the network. And that cannot be done by Network Rail alone. And it's really encouraging that our supply chain have really raised their game. They have told us, they have demonstrated to us where that sweet spot is, and we need to build on that. And that only then encourages our commitment to deliver that ever-increasing cost. And we're roughly forecasting about a standard track kilometre now of electrification for 2 million and lower. And that's not a target, that's just where we are today. The target is to get that ongoing cost low, low, low. Because again, all that does is it transitions that, well, is it a discontinuous choice or is it a full electrification choice? So again, that full focus on programme, that full focus on cost really drives our potential to unlock opportunities, and opportunities continue to drive that level of investment. And part of that really demands a continuous cultural change from all of us. You know, and some of it needs to start with government and through the Transport Scotland Agency. And that's where Team Scotland, you know, we're continually challenging ourselves. You know, so we look each other in the face, we look each other in the mirror, and we have pretty open and pretty frank and, dare I say it, very challenging conversations. But if we don't have those conversations and those challenging conversations, you know, bad news is never good news. But it's better to get the challenges out on the table where we can solve those challenges and reduce the impact of those challenges so that we do continue to make that journey forward. And that continuous improvement is not just on infrastructure. It gets back to the heart of this. The railway is a system of systems. So the train management, the train operation, the infrastructure management, the infrastructure operation, and the capital delivery programmes have all got to sit in the same conversation. Because if we don't, then we're going to hit some bumps in the road, and sometimes those bumps in the road can be fairly large. So again, that integrated pipeline of approach about taking cost out of the operation is the only way that we can achieve what we're setting out to do, because the affordability question is a really big question. So the overall net cost of the railway's got to come down. That's the only way we'll unlock that continued level of investment. Our supply chain have told us about a number of key focus areas. Some of them will be of no surprise, to be honest. You know, it's things that people have been really telling us for a number of years. You know, we really need to get to that production mentality. That production mentality requires a level of access. That level of access really needs to take on board the level of disruption that that access will cause, because it comes back to that conversation. You know, the railway's here to move people and goods. The railway's not here to dig the railway up, to create new projects. So that's a very challenging position to be in, but it's a hugely opportunistic one to be in. And again, that's where that continuous improvement, that continual challenge of how we do things. Because as I said earlier, the railway needs to be open at times when previously we closed it. So we need to think about how we fit that production-led environment into an access window that will change, and because if we don't get into the mindset of agility, because the growth will need to be agile, and therefore, again, that's one of the challenges, and how do you create that rolling program with that steady change that isn't bulky, it isn't spiky, but you've got to have that level of agility. We don't have all the answers. So again, we've got to be continuously challenging ourselves. Modernisation of plant. You know, again, we've always had this dynamic conundrum about at which point do you make the investment in new plant? Well, again, it needs a level of utilisation. Should Network Rail own the plant and free issue out to our suppliers? So that make versus buy is a challenge that we're looking at just now. Or do we go into long-term strategic relationships with the plant supply organisers who arguably understand plant better than Network Rail. Whoever will understand how the plant can be more reliable, how it can be more effective, how we can take the cost of it out. So again, all of these discussions are taking place. They will continue to take place because this is a continuous programme. And if we don't have those conversations on a continuous basis, then we will stifle, because we will get to a point where we can all look at ourselves and say, well, haven't we done a really good job? But that job will continue to be a challenging one. And the biggest challenge is probably always going to be affordability. And without that challenge on affordability, we're unlikely to see that level of investment. So in wrapping up, there are a number of challenges there. But I think the one thing I would really like to emphasise today is Team Scotland is committed to this challenge. Network Rail, as a key part of Team Scotland, is absolutely committed to it. But the real commitment needs to come across the rail industry, because every part of the rail industry has got a part to play. Some smaller, some larger, but often the smallest parts can actually have the biggest impact. So I guess my message for everybody in the room today, be an engineer, be a project manager, be an operator. We've all got a part to play. Everybody's got a voice that needs to be heard. So please, please play your part. Thank you, Peter.